Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. This is episode 145 of the Meet the Farmers podcast, and I'm your host, Ben Eagle. Today, I'm heading to glorious Abedeenshire to meet first-generation farmer and grazier Nikki Yoxall, who I last spoke to for the Nature Friendly Farming Network podcast. Do go and check out that podcast if you haven't already listened. With a background in teaching and further education, Nikki is an absolute, and she really is, she's an absolute inspiration for anyone looking to get into agriculture. That was key from my first conversation with her. Along with her husband, she has grown her wee mob, who you'll hear about today, from just a couple of heifers in the early days on 18 acres of land, and now works with neighbouring farmers and landowners on a number of landscape scale projects, some really exciting projects, including a particularly interesting rewilding project, which I'm sure we'll talk about today as well. Nikki, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ben. Thanks so much. You're very kind saying all those lovely things.
Oh, not at all. I don't say anything that's not true. Tell us about your part of Aberdeenshire, first of all.
Yeah, so we are on the River Devon, which is a beautiful river, has been historically quite a famous salmon river, not far from the River Spey. And we are in a part of upland Aberdeenshire, sort of near the Murray border. So Aberdeenshire has the best of everything, really. It's kind of got from the mountain to the sea, and we're in the upland bit, which is, particularly nice.
Okay. And I've already mentioned that you're not from a farming background yourself. So what was life like for you growing up? You grew up in Shropshire?
Yeah, so we weren't a farming family, but we were very definitely a horsey family. So I grew up in very rural Shropshire, which was beautiful, and had lots of horses. And, because we were in a very rural place, inevitably had lots of friends that were farming and spent quite a lot of time on farms and kind of in lambing sheds and things. So yeah, it was a lovely childhood. Sadly, my dad passed away when I was 12, so I had quite a tricky time during my teens kind of coping with that. But yeah, ended up which led to later on decisions around not going to university at 18, as most people do, and kind of taking a different career path. But yeah, it was kind of equally idyllic, but also quite stressful after that point when I was 12, and we had that kind of horrible experience of dad passing away.
Yeah. So I mean, so when you were 18, and you were sort of looking at your life ahead, was there anything that sort of struck out that you wanted to do? I mean, obviously you began a career in education, but was that part of the plan?
No, and I didn't initially kind of go into teaching. I'd got a place at university, a very good university, despite kind of having a pretty tricky time doing my GCSEs and A-levels. And I suddenly decided that I wanted a year off, went and lived independently, got this little flat in Shrewsbury. And after that, decided I didn't want to go to university. And my mum said, well, if you're not going to go to university, you need to go and get a job that's got a good pension scheme. And I couldn't join the forces.
That's a great mum comment.
Yeah, I couldn't.
Great parenting there.
Very sensible for my mum. If anyone knows her, they'll know that she's not normally that sensible. But yeah, I couldn't join the forces because I've got pretty bad asthma. So I joined the prison service, and I actually did a couple of years as a prison officer.
Really? I didn't know that.
Kind of. So went and did that for a couple of years. It was incredibly stressful. I was far too young to be given that kind of level of responsibility. Wow. Yeah. And yeah, dealing with some really troubled people in a really sad part of their life. People who were very mentally ill and who were really at crisis point, and being in a prison isn't a good place to be when you feel like that. So kind of working with men who were really struggling with their mental health in the prison service. So I ended up leaving that to go, and I just realized it wasn't good for my mental health being there.
Yeah.
And I got a job actually as an outdoor instructor for a kids adventure company.
I will be bringing you down here next week then.
Yeah, so for a season, I thought I'll just go and do something seasonal, get my mind in a different place and take a break. And it was somewhere that had accommodation, so I didn't have to worry about kind of finding anywhere to live or any of that sort of stuff. And that was in Devon, and I met my now husband there. So he was also working there at the same time. And obviously working with groups of kids and kind of delivering outdoor education instruction made me realize how much I love kind of,
That's where it came
standing
from.
in front of a group of children. Yeah, so that was kind of where the education bit started. And then I ended up working for an organisation that works with kids that want to join the forces. So because I'd worked in the prison service, there was that kind of uniform services link.
All ties in.
Yeah, so I was working there, and I got really interested in teaching maths and English with those. So the government changed the rules that if you were in full-time education and you hadn't got your GCSEs, that you had to do some sort of maths and English. So I ended up teaching these kids that wanted to join the forces a bit of maths and a bit of English, and just loved it and seemed to be pretty good at it. And it just felt like a natural place to be. Ended up going and working in a college, and then kind of got really interested in the education sector in schools. If you want to be a head teacher, people are really supportive of that. If you know, there's lots of programs and kind of ways of developing your experience to become a head teacher. But in the college sector, that doesn't exist. And you're kind of quite often, people look at you in a weird way if you say that you want to be a principal, or you want to go into senior management, or you want to kind of develop your management skills. So I ended up getting involved in all these different kind of management development programs because I thought, you know, I want to progress my career and this is where the direction I want to go in. And I ended up blagging my way to a conference where I met the deputy principal of one of the best colleges in England and basically said, oh, if you've got any jobs coming, here's my card, let me know. And about 3 weeks later, I got a message from him saying, I don't know if you're interested, but we've got this head of land-based education job going. It's probably not something you're interested in, but it would be a good way of getting some interview experience. And then I became head of land-based learning. So yeah, that was the kind of the process that I went through to get there.
How incredible. What I love about that is clearly there was never any plan.
No.
But you are a great example of one of those people who one thing has led on to another, and life is just a great adventure.
Totally. Yeah, never really had a plan.
So you're at this land-based college, you start the new job. What's going through your head? What's the experience? And I'm guessing it's a complete change of life, but it's also it's a change of location as well.
Yeah, so that took us to West Sussex, and we got a lovely house as part of the job on site. So it was about 500-acre estate, really beautiful ancient woodlands full of bluebells. I really miss that actually, because we don't really have them up here.
Sounds tough.
Yeah, it was really tough life. And we had obviously as part of the estate, we had a farm, which was a brilliantly run dairy unit, and we had about, I think, 200 lin ewes and a few pigs and things. And then we also had like the animal care unit and the equine. Because of my horsey background, I kind of fitted in okay with the equine bit, so that kind of made sense. And we ran arboriculture and horticulture and all these different programs. But I always found myself drawn to the farm. And that was probably because the farm manager, Dan, was just an absolute legend, just an incredible guy. Yeah, just so passionate, so brilliant at working with kids that had come from a really difficult background, but also so knowledgeable. And he had come from a Cumbrian dairy farm and had come south towards the bright lights of Brighton and hadn't quite made it, and had ended up in very kind of conservative West Sussex. So yeah, that was quite interesting. Yeah, we had basically it was a grass-based dairy system, and that really opened my eyes to kind of low input farming and what the potential of that was and how that could run. And Dan was out there with his plate meter every evening, and I was, you know, often down there helping out at lambing, or, you know, just going and talking to students and seeing what they were doing. And I was just so drawn to the farm. I absolutely loved it. And we decided that we were really happy there and we weren't going to move. And I'd been there for 3 years, and we said, right, this is it. We'll do at least another 5 years here. It's the dream job, beautiful place, brilliant people. And then I got encouraged to apply for a job in Scotland, which I felt was out of my league. It was a senior management post. Okay. And I thought, oh, well, I'll just apply. And if I don't get it, it doesn't matter, because I'm really happy where I am. And if I did get it, in the unlikely event I got this job, then we can, you know, I can always turn it down. Don't have to take it. And yeah, I got the job. So,
all change again.
Yeah. And I think it was because I was very relaxed, because I was like, well, if I don't get it doesn't matter. So I was very chilled out in the interview process. And I got offered the job and thought, right, we've got to move to Scotland then. So that was it.
Okay. So the move happened. Where did you move particularly? And again, take me back to that particular life change again.
Yeah, so that was 4 years ago. So we moved here in very start of 2018. we moved to here, to where we are now at How Mill. Well, sort of. We put an offer in on the house. It got accepted. And then, as is the way with houses that have private water supplies, there was this absolute nightmare where basically the mortgage company weren't happy with the water results. And this rolled on for 5 months. So I'd started this new job, big, scary senior manager job, never been that responsible for that many people or that much money before in my life. And doing that whilst living out of Airbnbs for 5 months with 4 dogs
sounds fun.
Quite an experience. But luckily we found some great people in the village, actually, who were quite happy with us being in their Airbnb for most of that time. And they actually built a kennel as well outside for us for the dogs, which was wonderful. And we kind of, we still see them now and again. And so we Airbnb'd for 5 months. And then we managed to move in to How Mill, and that was us 4 years ago. And it's been a bit of a whirlwind since then.
Tell me about the wee mob. How did that begin?
So whilst we had moved here, my husband decided to take some time off. He wasn't working. We decided he didn't need to find a job initially. Financially we were okay. So he sort of took a bit of time to work out what he wanted to do. He used to restore classic cars, which didn't really kind of fit with our environmental goals, I guess. So when we moved up here, he obviously stopped doing that, and just wanted to take a bit of time to work out what he wanted to do. And the Soil Association in Scotland ran some amazing knowledge transfer projects, and they were incredibly just inclusive and open to anybody. And so he started going to some of these events, and at one of those he met Rob Havard, who folk listening may know, farms in Worcestershire.
I think he was something like episode 40 or something like that of the podcast.
Okay,
scroll back, listeners.
Yeah, so Rob's brilliant, and he is, for those that don't know, an ecologist and a farmer, and he's been using holistic management for a long time now, probably well over a decade, I'd imagine, maybe longer than that. And heard him speak, and everything he said just made total sense to my husband, and was like, yeah, of course, why wouldn't you move animals, and why wouldn't you kind of integrate farming into the ecological kind of niche within the farm system, and it just sort of, all this stuff made sense. And James had also been learning about permaculture, and in permaculture there's this recommendation that you wait for a year and observe, that you don't kind of, when you move to new land, that you don't rush in, but that you take 12 months to kind of learn where the cold spots are in the winter and observe kind of the different plants that come up, and that you just take time. So we did that for a year, and which is very difficult because I was desperate to have chickens, because we'd left all our chickens in Sussex, and I really wanted hens, and James was like, no, we've got to do this observation period.
You've got to wait.
Which for someone with ADHD, who is incredibly impulsive and very impatient, it was the hardest.
It's a bit of a problem.
Months. Really difficult. So as soon as the 12 months, even before the 12 months was up, I was like, right, ready to just buy animals and go crazy with it. But we actually used the time to think about, right, cattle make sense. From what we'd learned from Rob, cattle 100% made sense. And we also have, quite locally to here, Lynn Breckcroft, which some folk may have heard of. So Lynn and Sandra, who have become great friends of ours, and they have been using holistic management, and they run an incredibly successful small farm, and they've just got a book out, so highly recommend reading that. Sorry, a bit of a plug there.
Give that a plug.
This Wild Farming Life, it's very good. So we kind of chatted to them about how we wanted to have cattle. They were really supportive. They have Highlands, and we didn't want Highlands because we're not in the Highlands. We started thinking about rare breeds, and we thought, well, there's an Aberdeen Angus, which would be perfect, but the native line is kind of more tricky to get hold of, kind of because they've been obviously developed into a more of a commercial kind of beast. So native Angus are a bit trickier to get hold of. And we started looking into rare breeds and discovered Shetland cattle, and thought, oh, they're nice. They've got horns. They're actually, dual purpose. Well, they used to be draft animals as well. So on Crofts and on Shetland, they would be used for draft, power, as milking animals, and also for beef. And we thought, we really like that kind of, the multiple use of them, and the fact that they're native. So we got a couple of Shetland heifers, and they arrived looking absolutely terrified in this trailer. And some bloke had turned up to kind of do some groundworks here a week before, and had just dug like a massive hole, and it was all like had happened without us knowing really about when he was coming. I just remember these two heifers coming off the trailer, and I just felt so embarrassed that these people had turned up, they delivered them for us, and the place was just chaos. And we'd like rigged up this really bad race and basically kind of went through the garden. It was just ridiculous. So, but yeah, we got them into a paddock, electric fence trained them, and that was it. We were off, moving them daily. And we then got another one. We did a cow funder. So people started to follow what we were doing on social media, and they really liked it. And at the same time, James Reedbanks did a cow funder for his Belties. So I jumped on the back of that and said, other cow funders are available. And yeah, we had some incredibly generous people donate money. And with that, we were able to buy Georgia, who is now our herd matriarch. And yeah, we just kind of continued from there. And we were able to buy more cattle and build the herd. And we also brought in some Galloways as well. So we now run a mixed herd of Shetlands and Galloways, with one odd one out shorthorn cross. So yeah, we've kind of got this, but we're really interested in kind of how we breed for resilience. So we're not as focused on kind of the pure kind of meeting the breed standard. For us, it's about how do we breed a resilient herd for the kind of system that we want to run.
Okay, tell me about working with your neighbours, and especially the rewilding project that you're involved with.
Yeah, well, because we only have 18 acres, we weren't going to be able to carry that many cattle on that. And 9 of it is woodland, and some of it's some of it's bog, some of it's incredibly steep. So we kind of knew if we wanted to grow this and actually make it financially viable, we'd need to find other land. And we had neighbours kind of driving past slowly, looking over the fence, like, what are they doing there with that electric fence? What's going on? Yeah, we got into conversation with a neighbour who said, you know, this stuff you're doing, could you come and do that on our land?
Okay.
We've got this bit that we don't graze the sheep, but we'd really like, it's 40-acre block, and it's the most beautiful piece of ground. I just love it. It's mixed birch wood, there's loads of scrub, there's kind of species rich meadows in parts of it. It's just really beautiful kind of mosaic landscape. So we started putting them up there, moving them daily again, and it went really, really well. Then another landowner who's our other neighbour said, oh yeah, I like what you're doing. We've got some ground that, we can't really manage with our sheep. So everyone around here has sheep. We can't really manage our sheep on it. Could you put the cattle on it? Again, absolutely perfect. Just, yeah, cattle really settled in, really beautiful silver pasture system. And yeah, from then on, we just kind of continued working with other people and picking up bits of land here and there. And we noticed that the estate opposite us on the other side of the river had been bought by Highlands Rewilding. So that's Jeremy Leggett, who he initially bought the Bunloit estate, and then he's since bought Beldorney and some other land. And his focus is on nature restoration. So, the idea of rewilding, but also thinking about how to engage better with local communities. And he is committed to mass ownership. So he doesn't own the estates himself. They're owned by Highlands Rewilding, which is a company with, at the moment, I think 50 shareholders currently own Beldorney, and they're looking to increase the number of shareholders so that it's not just kind of one green laird doing his thing. Actually, it's about more people having access to own land in this way. So we got in touch with him and said, we noticed that you've bought this, we've heard about that happening. We are your local graziers, and we're always looking for land, and this is the way we work. And he was really interested and invited us to go and have a conversation. And that kind of probably went on for about 4 months, backwards and forwards, different kind of conversations. And what I understand is that every time he spoke to people about possibly bringing animals onto the ground, our name kept popping up. So other people would say, oh, you probably want to talk to Nikki and James. They're probably neighbours of yours.
Yep.
Or, have you heard of these Grampian graziers? They're out in your neck of the woods.
Yep.
So it just sort of felt like it kept coming back to us. And he then invited us to work with him on the estate. And we're now working, we've got the wee mob over there. And we're particularly interested in developing or restoring species-rich grassland, and kind of building in silvopastoral kind of wood pasture systems as well, because that's a kind of thing that we really love.
Okay. As a project, because Sarah said, especially when you talk to farmers in well, all over the country, really, maybe especially in Wales, but everywhere else, yeah, the word rewilding still attracts strong opinions. Let's say that.
Totally.
That particular project, how's it been going down with local people?
I think that Jeremy has worked really hard to engage local people. So there's been a number of events where people have been able to come to the estate and voice their opinions and have that conversation, some of which has been quite tricky, and is definitely informed by a kind of wariness and a concern about what's going to happen here. And also people see the land there as good, productive agricultural land.
Right.
But having now got cattle on there, I think folk are sort of feeling a little bit more at ease. Like they see that, yes, a local grazier business is now working with the estate. So I think that there is, we've had good feedback, people saying it's good to see the cattle on there, that they're happy that, it's not kind of going to waste, for want of a better term, and that it's not all just going to be trees.
Let's just talk a bit about your experience coming into the industry. Especially from what is clearly quite a varied background before. How have you found it? I mean, how welcoming have you found the industry?
Yeah, I found the industry equally welcoming and equally isolating, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, no, probably more welcoming than not.
Okay. On balance.
On balance, yeah, probably more welcoming than not. And I think it's really difficult as a first generation farmer because, and I think the thing that I've really realized is, having worked in different organizations, particularly in the public sector, and having a very different understanding of, for example, how strategy development works or how you undertake change management. And I see that kind of the need for that within agriculture at the moment is huge. We're going through this massive period of shift and change. We've got new agricultural policy being developed in Scotland. And I've really realized how, I guess, under-prepared many people are in the sector for being able to cope with strategic development and kind of implementing change and having to develop their own leadership capacity. And so I think that when you kind of show up in the sector as somebody who is confident in their own kind of capacity to lead in terms of their thought processes or the way that they interact with other people, sometimes that's really welcomed because folk see that as being something that we obviously need within the sector. And sometimes it's really, there's real resistance because they kind of, who are you coming in with such little experience, telling us all what to do? And often that isn't, I'm never telling people what to do. I'm kind of saying, this is what we do, it works really well, or this is what I recommend other people might want to look at. So yeah, I think that's sometimes where the conflict might arise. But at the same time, around here, from what I've said already, people were really welcoming. Come and stick your cattle on here. No, you don't need to worry about paying. Just bring them. That kind of welcoming community and people just helping each other out is incredible. And I experienced that as a kid growing up in Shropshire, surrounded by farms. There was always people that would help if you needed it. There's always someone with a tractor to pull a car out of a muddy ditch that I inevitably drove into when I was 17 or whatever. So yeah, that kind of whole community spirit of the sector is incredible. But I think there's a lot of deep underlying issues around feeling like the sector is holding the burden for all of the world's ills at the moment, and challenges around issues, family dynamics that can really get in the way of change, and issues around how the language that we use and how we communicate with people and how that makes us look. And what we do we ever really mean what we say and say what we mean, and all those sorts of things.
I think that's such an important one, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, is that there are so many of these things just we all know in reality that they're there, but we don't talk about them. They are very much silent issues that are perhaps seeping to the surface on in podcast discussions and things like that, but in reality, on a farm by farm level, I'm not quite sure yet.
No, I agree. And, we have those experiences. I'll know when there's something up with my husband, when he's a bit snappy or a bit annoyed, or, we all know when we're with somebody, when they're a bit annoyed about something, and it's not your fault, but you're like, there's something going on here. What's happening? And I quite often feel like the sector is like that. Like there's a defensiveness, there's a kind of underlying simmering anger about where we are at the moment and how we're treated by policymakers, by customers, by activists. And we're not always able to articulate that. And we're not always able to sort of say, this is, we feel like this is unfair, or we feel like we're not given a voice. And so we become more defensive and we become more annoyed. And then that spills out in other ways and affects other people and other relationships that we don't want to affect. But because we're bottling all this stuff up and we don't have a way of articulating ourselves, it has an impact. So yeah, and I think that's really, a really difficult place for us to be.
So obviously, you've already mentioned Rob, and you've loosely mentioned your sort of management style as well. I'm pretty sure we have talked about it on the podcast before. Well, we definitely did with Rob quite a while ago. But let me just turn to holistic management. What is it?
Yeah, so it's a management framework that you can apply to any business, any life decision. It doesn't just have to relate to farming, but because it intrinsically recognizes the importance of land and natural resources at its very center, it makes absolute sense to kind of apply it to a farming context. And it's all about working out what you want your life to look like and what you want your farm to look like and your environment to look like, working out how you're going to get there, and then harnessing the power of natural cycles to do that in a way that is very much kind of environmentally and ecologically focused. So for us, that means setting a holistic context that says that we want to create abundance and diversity and nourish our local community. That's our statement of purpose. And then we have a context that sets out what we want our days essentially to look like in the future. So we want to have time outside with our animals. We want our animals to be healthy so that we're not having to spend lots of time dealing with issues. We want to have a diverse range of income streams so that we've got interest and resilience in our business. So we set out all these different things that we want to achieve, and then we apply our understanding of mineral cycling, community dynamics, energy flow, and kind of the tools that we can use by moving our animals around to get us to that point. So it's very much a decision-making framework. And it comes out of the work of Alan Savory and what he kind of explored and discovered as a land manager in Africa. And it's Savory hubs and that whole kind of community is huge. It's global. And there's people kind of doing this in various ways all across the world. So it's a really interesting community to be part of, for sure.
Yeah, no, that sounds brilliant. Can you signpost people towards any sort of material or anything that if anyone's interested in that sort of format, how could they find out more?
Yeah, definitely. So in the UK, the official Savory Hub is an organisation called 3LM. So that's the number 3 and then L for Lima, M for Mike. Prison officer training coming in there, knowing my phonetic alphabet.
Very good.
So Sheila and Chris Cook run 3LM, and they are great people to go to. And there's a whole suite of training that they can engage with. If you are working in an upland context, I would really recommend the work of Caroline Gwindrod through her company Wilderculture. And they kind of take a form of holistic management and explore how that can be applied in an upland context, which really fits with the kind of food production whilst rewilding model, particularly that we're working in. So those are probably the 2 things that I would really recommend. And obviously Rob Havard is a great source of information, and there's loads of webinars. I've hosted a few with Rob that are available through Pasture for Life YouTube channel and other places that you could go and watch and maybe find out more.
Random one here. You've started tanning hides,
yeah,
which I think is absolutely fascinating. What brought that on, and can you just take us through the process of how you do that?
Yeah, so we wanted to make the most of the animals that we send to slaughter. So all of our beef is sold through direct sales. So we have customers locally that we sell beef to, either as a sort of beef box scheme, and then we have other cuts that we sell individually, and we've got a restaurant that we work with, which was great. And that means that even some of our offal disappears off to other people, and that's fantastic. But we realized that this other amazing product leather isn't being utilised in the UK, and there was one remaining tannery that would take private hair-on hides for tanning, and they stopped doing that last year, partly as a result of COVID, I think.
Right.
And we thought, well, hang on a minute, people have been doing this for thousands of years. It can't be that difficult to tan a hide. People have been doing it for as long as there's been people. I'm sure we can work out how to do this. So we thought we'd give it a go, and we did lots of research, and the research all tells you completely different ways of doing it. There's a lot of choice there to take in terms of how we would take that forward. We wanted it to be as natural as possible. So basically the process is that you scrape all of the kind of excess fatty stuff off the hide. So you've got the hair on one side, then the skin, and then the side that's kind of like the inside, I guess, if you like, is the area that you're working with. And you scrape all the excess fat off, and you clean it all off, and then we stretch it on a big frame. So you've kind of got this huge, great big wooden frame, and you tie the hide onto it. And then we were applying an alderbark tea. So we were taking alderbark chippings, which are really high in tannin.
Okay.
And we were soaking them in water, and then we were using that as a concentrated way of basically painting that onto the hide. And then you just leave it and you paint it, and you leave it and you paint it. And then you do something which is scudding, where you kind of rough up the hide a little bit, and that helps for increased absorption of the tannin solution. And you just keep doing that until it's all absorbed, and it dries out. And yeah, that's kind of the stage we're at the moment. So the next stage,
right, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly, you need space, but it's like a 5-minute job every day just to kind of paint the stuff on, and then you just leave it. It's it's incredible. So we're just at a point where we will be creating the hide to be more supple. So we'll kind of have to work the hide essentially, and then probably oil it, and then that will be it as a rug for us. And then we've got other ones at various other stages that are being kind of painted. And we'd love to get to a point where we can sell them, but we also are really liking the fact that we could possibly we're just using them ourselves at the moment.
Part of the show where we talk about bigger farming issues, what's high on your list?
Oh gosh, there's so much, isn't there? Where do we even start? There are so many issues in and around farming at the moment, not to mention the existential crises of climate and biodiversity loss. If we just park those for a minute, there's all sorts of issues around, a completely broken food supply chain, the cost of inputs for those people that are still, heavily reliant on those inputs, which is many farmers. Issues around that I've already mentioned to do with communication with consumers. I think the probably biggest issue is around mistrust that is underlying all of those other problems, is around kind of mistrust and misinformation, and the utter disconnection both between consumers and where their food comes from, but increasingly between farmers and the ecological processes and natural processes that go on their farms that they just seem to be not aware of. I've done quite a bit of work recently with different groups of farms, one of which is around kind of plant identification and species-rich grassland restoration. And it amazes me how few plants farmers know that I work with. And I was talking to a conservation officer yesterday, and she said, God, these farmers don't know many plants, and the ones they do know, they hate and want to get rid of. And I just thought that was so funny that she'd noticed this. And so I think farmers are very good at saying the public have no idea where their food comes from, they're so disconnected. But I think the farming sector as a whole has become more disconnected from the natural processes on our land than we probably realise.
You going forward where you are, obviously you've got a lot going on, short term and long term. What would you like to do?
Well, I'm currently doing a PhD at the moment, which I hadn't mentioned.
I was going to say. Small thing on the side at the moment.
Yeah, just this little project I've got going on. So that's a real focus for me. So I spend probably just over 2.5 days a week working on my PhD. And then we've got the farm, and then I also do work for Pasture for Life as well. So quite a lot going on. But I guess, the aim is to get that PhD done. and to use the knowledge that I gained through that to kind of think about how to better work with farmers in terms of transition. So I'm studying, agroecological transitions. How do we support and develop models to help farmers change what they're doing and become less reliant on external inputs? So yeah, that's a real focus. But also the work that we're doing in a rewilding context, I guess I'm really excited to see how we can demonstrate that food and farming can fit in as part of that nature restoration project, and that it is something that maybe can replicate it elsewhere, and it isn't rewilding or farming, but that a land sharing agroecological approach can tick both boxes.
Yeah. So we always finish the show with the same two questions. The first is, if you have a message for the public, what would it be, Nikki Yoxall?
Message for the public would be to take a bit of time to make purchasing decisions that reflect your values. So there is some, quite often hear people say, I'm not going to eat meat or dairy because I don't agree with industrial farming. But you can still eat meat and dairy, but you can just take a bit of time to work out where those products are coming from. So there's some amazing organizations. I am going to say Pasture for Life, partly because I work for them, but I really believe in what they're doing in terms of 100% pasture fed meat, dairy and fiber products. So, just have a look out there to see where you might be able to source the things that you want to eat in a way that aligns with your environmental values.
Perfect. And finally, a message for farmers.
Oh, probably should have put a bit more thought into this one. I would say a message for farmers would be, it's really difficult because I don't want to come across as preachy, and I've definitely been told that I'm preachy before, but I guess it's just being open to sometimes getting out of the way of nature. Like, nature's got this and has been enabling cycles to happen for all eternity, for as long as the planet has been in existence. And I've definitely learned a hell of a lot stepping back and getting out of the way and watching those natural processes happen, and think about how I can replicate them in some way on the farm. So yeah, I guess that would be my message, which would be take time to step back, look at the verges, because they're always really abundant and diverse, and think about how that might look in a food production context.
Okay, we will leave it there. With that message. But yeah, Nikki, thank you so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure. And that I suppose I really hope that listeners will find your stories as inspiring as I do, because you've done so much, and there's still so much that you're going to do. How do people follow you on socials?
Yeah, so on Twitter, which is probably where I'm most active, it's at Howemill, HOWEMILL. And you can also find our website, grampiangraziers.co.uk.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you for listening as well. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening. And also please spread the word to anyone who you think might enjoy the podcast. It's been really great to see so many new listeners downloading episodes at the moment. And don't forget also, there's a whole bank of old episodes. Nikki mentioned Rob Havard. I really enjoyed that one, actually. I'll go back and listen to that one in particular. Next time, I will be heading to the Leicestershire Wolds to talk dairying and other things with Ruth Grice. So I hope you can join me then. But until then, have a great week.